They laughed first. A grainy photo had made the rounds. A man in a worn coat had bowed, slipping a small, purple-stamped envelope into a battered charity box at the corner of a grocery store. Someone at the office had blown the image up and set it on the break room screen between the coffee machine and the vending notices. Voices rose in easy cruelty, the kind that tastes like salt and calls it seasoning. "Who throws money away like that?" Marcus Webb snorted, leaning against the counter as if his posture alone gave him authority. Others joined in, snickers, jokes about naivete, about being foolish. The word homeless sat in the middle of the conversation like a verdict. They had seen him 100 times in their late-night cleaning rounds, always the same figure moving through the lobby with a mop and cart. But to most of them he was only an inconvenience, a background detail in their comfortable lives. The photo changed that into a spectacle. On the screen, the envelope gleamed, small and ridiculous. Someone made a meme. Someone else added a caption. A private message thread gathered steam. "Why would he give away money he clearly needs?" one asked. Laughter emojis multiplied. Across the room, Clara Lane watched without joining. She was the company's CEO. Early mornings and later nights had taught her the language of metrics and margins. Her world was glass and polished wood, contracts and quarterly goals. She had little patience for what she called sentimental anomalies. Still, she noticed the timestamp on the shared photo, an odd tilt in the pixels, and the faint note someone had added, curious enough to stick in her mind. Donated to the Parkside Children's Home, 11 minutes after midnight. Clara did not think generous people were foolish. She thought generosity usually followed capacity. The more you had, the more you could afford to be kind. So she assumed this picture was either staged or misplaced. Yet the timestamp nagged at her, and a small professional instinct, part annoyance, part curiosity, told her to check the payroll logs and door swipe data. If there was an inconsistency, she wanted to see it. If there wasn't, she wanted to know why an employee who barely made her notice at work was wasting what the world called limited currency. They kept laughing while she was already mapping out her late-night route. Jack Hale woke under the hum of streetlights and the rustle of upholstery. He slept in his truck when the shelter had no beds for him and his daughter, Ella. Some nights they lucked into a spot at the shelter. Other times they shuffled between friends' couches or parked near a laundromat that let them use the bathroom to wash with dignity. Wherever they landed, Jack had a ritual. He spread a thin fleece blanket across the bench seat, tucked Ella into the crook of his arm with the careful hands of someone who had learned to make safety out of whatever was available, and he counted, quietly, always counting. He counted coins at the end of each week, when the night shift paid him and when the tips were a few dollars more because someone had left a 5 in his hand and said thank you like they meant it. He counted not because he enjoyed knowing numbers, but because the act of counting made decisions deliberate. Decisions had consequences, especially for a man who had no cushion and a child to keep warm. Every dollar had a job: gas, a blanket for winter, toothpaste, a school project, or the small envelope that would be stamped and put away for another night. Jack's life was full of small economies. He skipped breakfast sometimes because a bowl of cereal for Ella mattered more. He mended pockets on his jacket by the light of a parking lot lamp. In the daytime, he worked nights in the downtown tower, pushing a cart that made a steady, lonely sound as it rolled past elevators and marble floors. He moved through the building unseen, a fixture in the after hours that no one thought to notice. He cleaned spotless glass, emptied overflowing trash bins, and straightened 1,000 little things that kept the polished world of offices functioning. What people saw of Jack was the surface, the coat that had seen better seasons, the tired smile he gave when someone said goodnight. They did not see the envelope he kept hidden under the spare tire in his truck. They did not see the purple stamp he pressed into paper because purple to him had become a small ritual of intention. He bought the stamp at a thrift store because it cost less than a pack of new envelopes. On the side of each one he wrote simply, in small careful letters, "For the children." He was not a man of many proclamations. His life expressed itself through repetition. He always showed up. The Parkside Children's Home was a small, tired building 2 neighborhoods over, its paint the color of old milk, its roof patched like a well-loved quilt. Mrs. Chen, who ran the home, had the kind of face that learned to map the needs of children the way a gardener reads soil. Her hands were scarred from years of mending and sewing. Her voice had a soft authority that chaos from settling in like dust. The home housed more children than its space could comfortably hold. Funding dried up more often than a leaky faucet in a winter freeze. Yet on most nights, after the children's heads touched pillows and soft giggles dissolved into sleep, Jack would cycle through one more set of tasks: fix a door that stuck, teach a boy how to tie a knot for a fort,
read to a girl who drew great wings on everything. He fixed things with the practical patience of a man who had learned to repair rather than replace. He would show up with duct tape and a borrowed hammer, staying long after the street lamp scuttered out as if the night owed him an extra hour. When he had the extra $1, he would give it to Mrs. Chen and say nothing.
When a child needed antibiotics, Jack pawned a watch he had been saving to repair and turned the small pawn shop notice into medicine. When a girl wanted a guitar lesson, but the home couldn't afford lessons, he sat and strummed with calloused fingers until she could get the chords right. He did not tell people. He did not post photos. He did not seek approval. The purpose of the purple envelope was secrecy itself. Inside it, he'd fold whatever extra bills he could gather, often $20 increments saved like tiny beads on string, and leave them with the home under Mrs. Chen's careful watch. He stamped each one in purple as if to brand it with the authority of quiet intention. The boxes at the entry said donations, and when Jack slipped the envelope through the slot, he imagined it landing like a pebble into a pond, the ripples small but sure. Back at the office, Clara followed the timestamp not because she believed anyone, but out of a precise irritation that something had not been accounted for. She pulled building access logs, scrolled through video footage, and found a sequence of door swipes. Closing time, a single keycard, Jack's, letting him back into the world before midnight, and letting him leave again after the first light. She saw him walk home with a small bag, see the garbage cans he straightened on his way, watch him pause to check a lamppost. There was nothing theatrical in it. There was only constancy. The day she decided to see where the money went, it was raining. The city slicked itself into reflections, and a sound muffled everything into a low, even rhythm. Clara drove the street lit by neon signs she normally ignored. Her heels clicked in the lobby as she watched Jack move through the door with the cart, his back slight against the rain. She followed, not with surveillance cameras, but with a quiet human curiosity that had nothing to do with policy. She parked 2 blocks away and kept the car engine off. For a long time, she just watched him walk under the rain's umbrella of sound until he disappeared down an alley and into the Parkside stores. The smell hit her first, the warm, dusty scent of crayons and detergent, and the particular, honest scent of children. She watched through the window as Jack moved among them like a familiar star, as if he had been orbiting their lives forever. One boy scrambled onto a table, and Jack engaged him in a game, laughter puncturing the hush like bright glass. A little girl with a crooked ponytail tugged at his sleeve, and he smiled in a way that made his eyes crinkle. He sang the same quiet song he had used on nights with Ella, the kind that sounded like a promise. Clara's hard assumptions, wrapped for years in spreadsheets and decisiveness, loosened like threads. She found herself standing in the doorway when the children lined up outside for the night. Mrs. Chen greeted Jack with a look that held gratitude so deep it translated into a small, unspoken blessing.
The home was not clean in a way Clara's eyes recognized. It bore the living marks of use and need. The light bulbs were dimmer than they should be, the heating went out in cold months, and the playroom paint flaked in places. Yet the room shone with a kind of currency no ledger captured, the presence of adults who came back every day, and children who, for brief stretches, could be children without questions about tomorrow. She watched Jack slip out into the back alley, and, to her surprise, follow. The alley narrowed, and the hum of the city receded, until it was only men and gutters, and the warm breath of a single man talking softly to his sleeping daughter in the passenger seat of a truck. He had parked 2 blocks from the shelter, and let his daughter sleep in the relative shelter of a vehicle because bed spaces were sometimes less reliable than a single truck floor. When he returned, he had a bandage on his finger. He'd nailed a hinge back into place, and a purple stamped envelope in his coat. Clara had not known she would feel like she was witnessing a sacrament. There was a simplicity to it that unsettled her. She had always believed that action, like profit, had to be visible to have currency. Here was a man who was poverty's acquaintance and generosity's companion. She could have left. She could have returned to the warmth and the safety of her polished world and let the office's laughter remain a small theater of cruelty that never met consequences. Instead, she went back to work with mud on her shoes and a new, personal responsibility she could not name. She called a meeting. Marcus sat at the conference table as if it were his stage. His smirk was still there, ready to widen. Clara did not let the room settle into its usual rhythm. She projected a couple of images, minutes from a security camera, a photo of a tiny envelope, and spoke, not with the business-like clarity she usually used, but with a voice that held a story. "It seems we laughed without knowing the facts," she said. "We mocked someone for what we thought he had, not for what he had done. There was a ripple of discomfort. Marcus tried to reclaim the narrative with a joke, something about soft hearts, but his words thinned under Clara's steady gaze. She told them what she had seen: the truck, the shelter, the repairs, the children's drawings taped to the wall with names on them. She described Jack folding a blanket for Ella the way a man folds a promise. She spoke of the purple envelopes, of Mrs. Chen's scarred hands, and of the quiet music that filled the home. Marcus's first reaction was defiance. "It's not my fault people posted it," he said, shaping the words like armor. "We were commenting. Humiliation is easy," Clara cut in. "Courage is hard." She asked him to stand in front of the office the next morning and speak to the real facts.
She asked the company to do something more than issue an apology: match donations, set up a partnership, and create paid volunteer hours for employees, so action was not left to late-night Instagram posts and guilt. Clara insisted that this act would not fix the system, would not end homelessness in their city, but it could be a sustained commitment that used their resources as leverage, not as a bandage. The meeting was sharp and public. Marcus's apology was not theatrical, it was measured, because Clara had insisted on propriety. He admitted he'd led jokes, that his words had cut a man who had done nothing but keep showing up. The apology carried in the room like a small opening of light. Some of his colleagues shifted, discomfort on their faces, as they realized how quickly they'd become contributors to someone else's shame. When the company began to act, it did so with both the clumsy sincerity of a corporation learning humility and the resources to follow through. They did a thorough fix: roof repairs, funds for medical needs, a renovation plan drafted with contractors who volunteered time. They did not pretend the work would end there. Clara arranged for a long-term partnership that allowed hourly employees to contribute time from their paid hours to serve. She created a small foundation arm that matched donations up to a certain percentage, conscious of not fooling themselves into thinking such a partnership solved a systemic crisis. She also insisted on a board of community leaders to oversee choices, so decisions wouldn't be just corporate optics. Meanwhile, Jack kept showing up. The night the company workers arrived with ladders and fresh paint, he was there with his toolbox and his easy, stubborn grin. He was not interested in being the point of the story. He was interested in fixing a roof leak above a bunk bed and teaching a girl how to tune a guitar string properly. Ella was perched on his shoulder, hair in a messy braid, eyes the color of weathered oak. She kept a small stack of drawings and tucked them into the home's bulletin board: suns with too many rays, houses with smiling stick figures, and in one corner, a rough, earnest portrait of a man with a mop and a cart. The office came in shifts. Some employees painted, others installed cabinets. They moved as if they had been practicing these tasks their whole lives, but more often they fumbled. There were apologetic smiles when a nail bent, proud laughter when a new hinge held firm. Marcus worked too. He hesitated at first and got paint on his cuffs. He watched Jack, watched the way children trusted him, the way Mrs. Chen's voice softened when Jack pointed at a misaligned window and promised to come back with a better fit. The humor he had used as armor in the break room dissolved under the stare of timber and sawdust and practical compassion. One afternoon, after Marcus had learned to hold a ladder steady without making jokes, he asked Jack to step aside for a moment.
The air smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. Children played in a corner with a ball they'd been given from a company donation. Marcus's fingers were still raw from a misused pair of pliers. He looked awkward, like a man trying to fit into a life that had not given him practice in humility. "Why do you—" Marcus began, voice small, the question that had once been the punchline of a joke. "Why do you give money when you have so little?" The room quieted. It was not the same group that had laughed in the break room. These people had seen hands calloused from work, heard the quiet joy of a boy tuning a guitar, watched as a woman whose fingers repaired everything smiled with a gratitude that filled the room. Still, Marcus's question was the hinge that let the room hold its breath. Jack set down the hammer he had been using and waited. There was no flourish. He had never been a man of show. His answer came slow, like water moving against stone. "I don't give because I have extra," he said, looking at the small, purple-stamped envelope peeking from his back pocket like a secret. "I give because I have a daughter who needs someone who will come back. These kids need someone who will come back. If I can be the kind of person who keeps coming, they learn not to believe that being forgotten is the natural order of things."
The words landed like a quiet bell. They did not sound at all like the speechboard lines executives knew. They were simpler, truer. Marcus's jaw went slack. He had expected drama or self-righteousness, some explanation that made a neat story. Instead, he received something more unnerving, the steadfastness of someone who had learned to resist despair by refusing to make absence normal. "I don't have much to hand over," Jack continued, voice steady. "I have nights of work, hands that can fix a hinge, time that belongs to me. I count coins and decide where they'll mean most. When I give, I choose to make a promise, not to buy attention. I choose to show up. That is my answer." Silence followed, not the kind made by people waiting for applause, but the kind that gathers when you realize you've been standing on a fault line and the earth has shifted. A child glanced up at Jack with hope in his eyes that asked for nothing other than continued presence. Mrs. Chen blinked and let a small smile pass like sun through a cloud. That was the answer that silenced them, not a sermon that demanded admiration, but a simple moral fact dressed in quiet, everyday bravery. The lesson was not rhetorical. It was visible in the way he mopped the floor where a child had spilled a whole cup of juice, in the way he returned with medicine when a boy's cough worsened, in the way he read the same story 3 nights in a row because the child had asked for it by name. Clara listened to him speak and felt a shift settle around her that would not unpick itself later.
She came to the parkside, not to fix the world, but to learn from someone her company's margins had nearly erased. She learned the mechanics of humility, small daily choices, steady repetition, and the refusal to perform for applause. She learned that presence, more than money, rewired a child's sense of safety. News traveled, not the viral mockery, but the more durable sort. Stories carried by people who had helped to repair broken parquet and had felt the texture of something real. The company's foundation published a careful, not self-congratulatory statement, acknowledging their error and naming a plan. A partnership with Parkside that would last beyond the news cycle. Marcus's apology to the office was not only verbal. He carried the box of donated school supplies into the home's playroom and knelt to sort crayons with a seriousness he had not shown at his spreadsheet. This did not cure homelessness. The roof still needed more work. The government had layers of bureaucracy that would not dissolve because one company decided to partner with one home. But the partnership created a stable channel, resources for repairs, for medical expenses, for scholarships and mentorship programs, so that the children's lives were less precarious night to night. The company also helped with job placement programs, internships, and counseling support. The emphasis Clara insisted upon was not on being the savior, but on leveraging resources to build resilience. People in the office changed in small ways. A woman who had laughed at the photo now brought her sewing machine to the home and taught kids how to make small crafts. A quiet engineer volunteered twice a month to help fix bicycles. Marcus found a new habit. Each Saturday he met the children in the park and tried to teach them about geometry with sticks and chalk. His hands shook the first time he adeptly coached a boy through a model spaceship, but he kept showing up. Jack continued his small economies. He still slept in his truck sometimes. He and Ellis still navigated imperfect nights. He took the occasional gig fixing an old neighbor's fence in exchange for dinner, and he taught kids how to find beauty in a cheap set of guitar strings. When a particular child required a minor operation and the money was tight, Jack gave what he could and then took on extra work to cover the rest. He wrote in a little notebook the dates he intended to be at the home, promising himself he would not miss a Sunday for music practice. Ella grew comfortable with the rhythm. She slept curled in the truck sometimes and in a small cot at the shelter other nights. She kept a small team of treasures in a Ziploc, a pencil with 3 nibbled erasers, a tiny toy harmonica, and a drawing of her father with the mop. She thought of him as sturdy and steady, a man whose hands could become anything that needed fixing. The purple stamped envelope became a quiet emblem of the home's small miracles.
One night, in the middle of a renovation, a child lined up several envelopes and stapled them together with a wobbly hand, creating a miniature book of hopes. The staff laughed and then leaned in respectfully. They didn't need explanations anymore. People had stopped asking whether it was believable that a homeless man would give. They'd begun to ask instead how many more people would choose constancy over spectacle. Clara, who had once tracked everything in quarters and columns, began to keep a different ledger in her head, one not of revenue, but of presence. She scheduled monthly visits. She learned how to hang drywall and how to be quiet when a child told a story of a house with no roof. She also learned how to listen without turning stories into data. In the process, she softened policies that had made it harder for employees to volunteer, expanded paid volunteer hours, and introduced training for managers to recognize people as whole, not only as parts of productivity. At a small celebration the Parkside organized for the children after the repairs were complete, Clara sat on the floor with a piece of cake in one hand and a paper plate in the other. The room smelled of frosting and sun-warmed crayons. Children performed a messy choir, a medley of off-key but earnest songs. Marcus led a clumsy game of charades that had the kids collapsing with laughter. Jack sat by a window with Ella on his lap, reading a book aloud. His voice carried through the room like an easy tide. A reporter from a local paper wanted a quote, a line that could be filed into a one-paragraph hero story. The temptation to make grand claims hovered like a bad perfume. Clara spoke carefully, refusing to inflate a moment into myth. "This is not the end," she said. "This is a commitment. We showed up because one man showed up first. If we learned anything, it's that showing up matters more than being on social media." The final scene of the staff's involvement was not a ribbon cutting with camera flashes. It was an evening when the home ran low on milk and the volunteers had left for the day. Jack, who had finished a late shift, walked in with a carton of milk and a battered loaf of bread he'd bought with his remaining cash. He placed them on the kitchen counter, hands steady despite exhaustion. "Why do you keep doing this?" a new volunteer asked once, curiosity blunt and honest, long after the cameras had left. Jack looked at the volunteer and then at the children playing with blocks at the far table. He didn't lecture, he didn't make a speech. He simply said what he had said in the company's new meeting. "Because I am a father. Because someone taught me that people matter when no one is watching. Because I have a daughter who needs to know she belongs to someone who returns." This time, the words carried differently. There was a quiet recognition, not of hero worship, but of how ordinary courage looks when practiced long enough. It needed no trumpets.
It needed steadfastness. As weeks became months, the office's culture shifted incrementally. The private threads that had once glorified mockery now shared photos of painted walls and handmade paper flowers. The story that had started as ridicule ended in stretch-room conferences where people learned how to volunteer with dignity, where Marcus apologized to colleagues for creating a climate that normalized shaming. He wrote a letter, short, honest, and unadorned, admitting how he had been cruel and outlining steps he had taken to do better. It read more like a start than a closure, and that was the point. At the heart of all the small changes, Jack remained careful to be a man not of spectacle, but of routine. He changed little in how he walked through his life. He kept the purple stamped envelopes tucked beneath the spare tire. Some weeks there were more envelopes than others. Some weeks Ella's school required a new pair of shoes, and he worked extra hours to buy them. When he had to choose between a pair of new sneakers and paying for a child's medicine, he had done the math before. Children heal faster when they have both health and hope. So he found other corners to cut. He learned to delay a haircut, to share his jacket with someone colder. The answer he had given, so simple it could be dismissed, kept reverberating. "I show up." He had said it without ego. The phrase became a quiet motto around the Parkside. They painted it in small letters on a workshop sign. Kids learned to say it when someone asked them why they had volunteered for a cleanup. It evolved into a practice, not a brand, showing up to coach, to teach, to fix, to read, to sit in the chair when presence alone was a salve. One night, months after the first photo circulated, a new group visited the home, families who had started sponsoring children's educational needs through the company's program. Among them was a woman with a small camera who had been following Parkside's story from the start. She asked to speak with Jack. He was reluctant. Interviews made him uncomfortable. But he sat and spoke softly about watching his daughter sleep and counting coins and small economies, about the odd comfort of being needed for practical tasks and the heavier comfort of being needed for love. Her recorder caught only a portion of his words. Later, in the office where the original mockery had been born, people listened to the recording in a hush. There was no triumphant crescendo in the track, only the plain human tension of a man who had learned to make a life out of fragments. When the recording ended, no one laughed. Marcus sharpened a pencil, and without being asked began writing a note of support to the Parkside, and every month he left a small envelope on Mrs. Chen's desk. It was hardly a public spectacle, it was a private habit. There is a temptation in stories like this to close with a tidy moral and polished consequence. That is not how most lives unfold.
The Parkside's windows still fogged in winter. The city still held more need than one partnership could cover. But something vital had shifted. A culture that laughed easily had learned to ask questions first.
A company that had once fetishized profit margins had set aside hours for service and learned that larger, consistent engagement mattered more than the flash of a single performative donation. The truth that first silenced the office, the man's quiet answer when asked why he gave, continues to work like a small reed beneath the surface of days. People remembered that when someone asked a hard question, the best reply might be a life lived in the only way that anyone can be persuasive, with reliability. At the parkside, children played under a roof that did not leak. A little boy, the one who had learned guitar from Jack, was beginning to sing in a voice that wavered and steadied like a flag catching wind. In the corner, Ella sat with a pack of crayons, adding too many sun rays to her drawings, a small grin that always drew the eye. She had learned to count coins too, but more importantly, she had learned to watch her father bend his whole life to the act of returning. One evening, Clara sat next to Jack on the concrete step outside the home. The night carried the feeling of things stitched back together with careful, patient hands. She had her sleeves rolled up and paint under her nails. He had a guitar on his knee and a small purple stamp in his pocket. She watched him watch the children and, after a long pause, asked the question that had started it all again, soft and honest. How do you keep going? Jack looked at the children, at the rhythm of their laughter, at the way one small boy clung to a repaired toy at his feet. He thought about the nights in the truck, the acts of quiet arithmetic, the way Ella curled into his chest when storm clouds promised rain. He could have said a multitude of things, but he said what he had said before, because truths do not lose their meaning when repeated. I show up, he said. I come back. That is how homes are made, one return at a time. Clara nodded. She had learned to keep looking, to keep asking how material resources could be leveraged, yes, but also to remember the primary variable, people who would, against daily friction, choose to return. She had seen what a life of consistent coming back could do. It changed how she led. It changed how a company moved its money. It created an opening in a city's map where kindness found purchase. If you believe small acts matter, if you think that showing up can change the shape of someone's night and eventually, bit by bit, the shape of a community, then consider what you might do in your own circle. Volunteer an hour, teach a skill, bring a loaf of bread, offer time when it will be noticed only by the people who need it most. Support local shelters and children's homes in ways that partner with their dignity.
Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that quiet, steady love reshapes the visible world. They mocked him once. They were silenced by a simple answer that did not demand applause. It invited consequence, repairs, apologies, commitments that stretched beyond a single viral moment. The work continues. Jack keeps his purple-stamped envelopes beneath the spare tire. Ella keeps drawing suns with too many rays. The city still hums and breathes and needs more people to decide that returning is the smallest, most revolutionary thing they can do. There is no single drama that fixed everything. There is only the long, necessary practice of showing up, again and again, until a life, and the lives it touches, can take on a little more dignity. If that feels like something you believe in, consider lending your time or resources to a local shelter or children's home. Show up, and let the answer that once silenced a room begin to change the way your city remembers itself.